Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Doing a run of videos at the moment that I call my food prep and planning videos post the 6-week grocery haul. So as I said, we're a family of 8, we live off-grid, we're about 4 hours away from the major town that I go to do all our groceries. So I only go every 6 weeks, and I spend 2 days or 2.5 days and 2 nights doing the groceries. And we do Coles and Woolworths and Aldi and Costco and Butchers and fruit and veg stores and all the rest of it. And we do it all, I do it all at once, and then I bring it all home. And then because we only shop every 6 weeks, we have to make sure to use the stuff that I bring home, preserve it, time it, and use it in such a way that it's going to last us the 6 weeks and beyond that, because some of the stuff does last beyond the 6 weeks as well. Ends up on the shelves, preserved in jars or in meals in the freezer and all that sort of thing. And when I first started doing YouTube and things like that, and I was talking about my 6-week grocery hauls, and I shared the 6-week grocery hauls because everyone loves a grocery haul, there was lots of questions about how we use it and how we make it last and things like that. So that's how these videos came about. I do this little spiel at the beginning of each one so that people who haven't watched before. I have roosters and pigs all deciding to just, harass me as they do. We live on 20 acres off-grid, and we have some roosters that are currently free-ranging. They were housed in the pig pen, and then we introduced a few extra roosters to the ones that were living in the pig pen because they were in there, scrounging through all the pig manure and things like that. And we introduced a few extras, and when we introduced those few extras, all of a sudden they decided that they didn't want to live in the pig pen anymore, and they all jumped out, and the pig pen doesn't have roof all the way over it. And so now they run around and cause havoc. We will be processing them in the next couple of weeks. We just have to have a poultry pen empty so that we can catch them at night while they're sleeping to put in the poultry pen. But regardless of that, and the pig pen is just behind me as well, past the gardens. So Boss, one of our pigs, keeps on saying hi. Anyway, what was I saying? I do these little spiels at the beginning of all of these videos because not everyone has seen one of them before, and my regulars know that I'm going to say it, and they tend to just skip through if they need to. So this is part 5 of this August's food prep. I got a little bit behind this month because I was really sick. I got laryngitis, and so I couldn't do any voiceovers or anything for any of my videos. So I'm running really far behind. Normally these would be finished before now, because my next grocery trip is actually like Tuesday week. So we're already 4 weeks into a 6-week grocery haul, and I'm still doing stuff with food, and I'm still doing these videos in amongst everything else. It's also a busy season. I didn't get around to doing a chat video this week, but I'll do one on the weekend because we got some IBCs delivered for our wicking beds and all sorts of things. So there's lots of stuff going on outside of just the food prep as well. But anyway, this is part 5. Now when I first started doing this, I used to do daily videos, and it was really hard to keep up. So what I do now is I condense a few days into each video and release them every couple of days. And that's what I found worked in that first initial period of being home after the 6 weeks. So that's what I've been doing. So this is part 5, and it's just a couple of days. It normally takes me 10 to 14 days to get everything sorted, and then there's some stuff that carries over till now we've got dogs going. And then I have some videos later on in the month as well, sometimes that are just things that I've carried over, that I've made. Stuff that I've done earlier in the month, so maybe some meat that I've minced earlier in the month and then used later on. I like to share some of those. I also have the website just finally getting started. It's still not finished, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on there that is just sample stuff that came with the layout that I purchased and have adapted. So I'm trying to make some videos for individual things that people want to go on the website. So if there's a specific recipe that you'd like to see a video on its own for, and then to go up on the website, let me know. I will try and put a post up, or maybe on the chat video I'll get everyone to do that or something, because I'm trying to, as I'm making certain things, I'm trying to get them up on the website. My photos aren't superb because I take the photos as I'm making it. It's very rare that I'm making a dish purely for the website. I'm always making it in amongst everything else because we need to make it, and then putting it on the website as well. So Photos aren't superb, they're normally just with my phone on a cluttered kitchen bench, but that's the way it is. But I will start making some videos that are like single item videos. I don't have many of those, most of these are these prep videos. So I will start making some single item videos so that they can go on the website with the recipe and everyone can find them there as well. So if there's something specific you want to see from start to finish in its own video, let me know and I will try and put them on the list of things to get done. But anyway, back to this one today. As I said, this is part 5 and see what we got done. So the bacon that I started brining, this is what I do with it every day. So it's in this container and it's in that brine, and what I do is I flip it every day. So I rotate it and flip it so that all the sides are having a chance to come in contact with that brining liquid, and that brining liquid has been made from the meat. So there was sugar and salt added, and then that has drawn some liquid out of the meat, and that liquid creates, and that moisture out of the meat creates this brining liquid. So that is sitting in the bottom, and I just make sure to rotate and flip the bacon around so that each parts of the bacon have access to that liquid. I probably don't show it every day because sometimes I do it up at the fridge. I open the fridge, I'm getting something else out, I see the container with the bacon and I go, that needs doing. So I just stand there and do it and then go and wash my hands and then continue on with what I was already doing. But this particular day I purposely brought it down to show you what was happening with it and how we go about doing it. If it's in a Ziploc bag, it's a little bit easier. You can normally just flip the Ziploc bag, but only if there's enough room in the Ziploc bag for the brine to be moving around, which is the trouble I had last time. The Ziploc bag just wasn't big enough for that brine to go all the way around the meat, so which is why I did it in the container this time. This month I bought 2 boxes of tomatoes. Because I've been unwell, they've been sitting in the fridge. Lucky with the new hybrid chest freezer fridge thing, there was plenty of room in there so they could sit in it, not on the bench. They're not the most superb tomatoes, being that it is winter, but they're passable and very inexpensive. They weren't very inexpensive compared to in-season tomatoes, but they were inexpensive for out-of-season tomatoes. There is places in Australia that grow tomatoes all year round, like we have tropics and stuff, so even in winter you can get tomatoes sometimes at a decent price. Sometimes it's not worth it, but if they're a decent price I will grab them even if they're not superb, especially since with the failure of the garden last year we didn't have any of our own to put up. So hopefully we fix all that this year, but for the moment if I can find them a good price I grab them to put on the shelf because we go through a lot of tomatoes. So because I was sick and hadn't done anything, I was running really late with getting everything done, and there were already a couple of tomatoes that had gone bad. I did what I normally do with them. I couldn't figure out what I was doing with them off the top of my head, so I did what I normally do, and that is to cut them in half, take the core out, and stick them in a cast iron baking tray. And then I add some chunks of garlic and some chunks of onion in there. I put a bit of smoked salt and oil over the top, and then I stick it in the barbecue. So our barbecue is our oven, and I roast them low and slow for a couple of hours. So it's probably only at about 160 that I roast them at, and I roast them for, it's probably 90 minutes, so probably an hour and a half to 3 hours. I want some nice colour on the tops, but I don't want them overly burnt, and I want some of that liquid to evaporate that's in the bottom of them and give them that really nice roasted flavour. So all I do is I fill trays up and I roast them, and I do that as much as I need to do to get through the tomatoes so that then they are halfway there to being processed for whatever I want, whether I want to make pasta sauce, pizza sauce, whether I want to just can them straight up as roasted tomatoes or freeze them in bags if I've got room in the freezer, which I don't really have much in the way of room in the freezer at the moment. But whatever I want to do with them, they're already partially processed and they're not going in completely raw into whatever process that I'm doing. So I did 2 lots of trays, I think. I did 4 trays up full of them, and then they got put in, don't know if there's more footage, but later on they got put into containers into the fridge so that I could deal with them the next day. So I just put them in the barbecue low and slow for a couple of hours while I was doing everything else around it. I got to work on another pork roast today, so as I've said, I buy these by the case, which means that I get 3 per 6-week shopping trip. They weigh approximately 7 kilos each on average. We use them for a variety of things, and some of each month ends up in the freezer or the shelf for future meals. So they are $7.99 a kilo if you buy them singly, $6.99 a kilo if you buy a case, which is why I tend to buy a case. I find these pork roasts are very versatile, and I use them in so many different things that they are a good, cheap purchase of meat. They're cheaper than the pork, they're cheaper than the chicken, cheaper than the beef. They're the cheapest meat that I buy, so I find it really easy to just buy a case of them every month and then make things out of them. Figure it out later. I don't like freezing whole roasts because they take too long to defrost, and they take up too much room in the freezer. So if I get really desperate to process them, like in a month that I'm having trouble, then I will just cut them into chunks and put them in jars and pressure can them and put them on the shelf for pulled pork at a later date. That's the most simple thing that I do with them if I really need to just get them sorted and out of the fridge and somewhere that, you know, they can be stored. I still cut all the rind off though, even if I have no set plans for it. I slice it all off and I stick it in a Ziploc bag for the freezer. This is worth the space in the freezer. It's a nice flat sort of a thing. It doesn't take up much room, it defrosts really quickly, and it can be used on a whim when I decide I want roast potatoes with dinner, or even another meal throughout the day, like a lunch or something. If we want to just roast some potatoes up, I can just pull a bit of rind out of the freezer, stick it over the potatoes and roast them, and the potatoes are really lovely roasted with that rind over the top so that the lard renders out of the crackling, and that's what your potatoes cook in. And the dogs really enjoy the little crunchy bits if the kids don't feel like eating them. I'm intending to mince this entire roast, so as I take the rind off, I cut it into pieces that will fit down the chute of my Louvel grinder. Depending on what I'm planning to do with the ground pork depends on whether I marinate it at this stage or later. If I'm making sausages, for example, I would weigh out my meat and salt and seasonings into a bowl, massage it into the chunks, and then refrigerate it for a while before mincing it so that the flavours permeate the whole sausages once they're in their casings. But if I have no specific set plans for the mince, I sometimes just grind it all up and I'll season it later. It's never as evenly seasoned when seasoning it as ground meat, but it's passable for a lot of purposes. So it really just depends on what I want to use it for. Sometimes it's easier to just mince the whole thing and then decide afterwards rather than making a call in the beginning. We haven't been making sausages lately purely through just not wanting to go to the effort, and it's sad because I really like sausages. We don't have a lot of freezer space at the moment either though. Last month we didn't make them because the fridges were playing up, and once you filled sausage casings you need to put the sausages in a fridge for the skins to set for at least 24 hours, and we didn't have that space. We do have that space now, so maybe this month I have to really make an effort. I was really sick this August, so I didn't get it done, but maybe September I really need to make an effort because I have all the hog casings in the fridge. We just have to soak them to make them, and the Louvel has a sausage stuffing attachment as well. We have tried it once. We ended up filling the sausage casings a little too tight and I couldn't get them to twist into links, but we know that better for next time because we've always done hand filling before, not with the motorized, so it was a bit of a learning curve. But if I'm going to make sausages out of them, yes, I marinate the chunks first, put it in the fridge, and then I'll mince it with all the marinade on it. Today was actually Surreal's 16th birthday, so in between everything else, I also baked her a cake. She'd requested chocolate cake with passion fruit icing, so that was what I was delivering. A super simple chocolate cake in 2 layers because that's what it makes a treat cake, to have icing in the middle. Because I tend not to make icing for all our everyday cakes, it's just not really needed. And I suppose by not doing it every day, it makes these birthday cakes all that more special. So I did one of the simple chocolate, you know, the basic chocolate cakes that use boiling water, and then divided it into 2 tins and put it in the barbecue to bake while other stuff was getting done, obviously after the tomatoes had finished. While that was cooking, I got started on grinding all the pork. Now, I rave about my grinder every time I use it, but I do adore it. It only takes about 1 minute per kilo of meat to grind up, which is just amazing compared to the KitchenAid stainless steel grinding attachment that I used previously. It's also much easier on the hands and shoulders because the height of it's on the bench, whereas the KitchenAid grinder, you had to lift your arms up higher to push the meat in, and I have a lot of problems with lifting my hands above shoulder height. I don't hang washing or anything anymore because everything goes numb, so lifting that up above my shoulders is really an issue. So having that grinder on the bench height is really good. I've actually even considered that at some point I wouldn't mind a bench that's a bit lower so that I am pushing downwards rather than even at the height of the bench. But you don't have to push very hard either because it feeds itself through, because it's just a really good grinder. So I tend to find that I only have to push stuff down the chute every now and again when something gets a little backed up. I grind everything on the coarse plate because I prefer that texture, and I try to keep everything nice and chilled. I think I put the chunks in the freezer while I mixed up the cake so that the meat would be nice and cold while grinding it. You can also put the grinder parts in the freezer too, which we do in summer. If your meat is too warm, then it'll come out with less texture. It'll be kind of pulpy rather than have those little pieces, because it'll be shoved through the, mushed through the grinding plate rather than being cut through it. So you definitely want it to be cool, cold, and you want the grinding pieces to be cold as well. And in summer we tend to do it in batches, so I might do a couple of kilos and then I might put everything back in the freezer for 20 minutes and then bring more out. It really depends on what I'm cutting and what the purpose is, but I definitely find that it tends to heat up too much in summer, and because the machine can heat up as well, and then it ends up being a little bit more mushy and pulpy than pieces. We do every year when I grind stuff in summer, I say I really should get ahead of doing this and make like sausages in bulk in winter so I don't have to do it in summer, but I'd have to have the money to buy enough meat to do that, and the time and inclination as well. So, I decided to season some of the mince with breakfast sausage seasoning. It's just I want something that I like. It's a mix of brown sugar, some rubbed sage, salt, pepper, garlic powder, smoked paprika, and a little pinch of ground cloves, and some chili flakes as well if you want some heat. I love these flavors with the pork mince. It's great with gravy. It's great as sausage patties. It's just a really flavorful seasoning, and I suppose it's reminiscent of the pork rub that I use on my roasts and stuff. It's got very similar flavors, except it's got that sage in there as well, which I really enjoy, but I wouldn't use sage in a rub because it would be exposed. Like, you wouldn't want it on the outside of a rub that's going to be smoked or burnt or anything, but minced in, like rubbed into the sausage meat, it works really well. So I mixed the seasoning up enough for the weight of the meat I had, and then added it to the meat and mixed it through well. By mixing it through like this, we're emulsifying the meat a little bit, which is fine because I'm going to use a bunch of this to make sausage patties. But be aware that the more you handle it like this, the more it will lose its individual texture. The more it will emulsify and become more like a patty type texture than an individual grain of meat type texture, if that makes sense. It also can toughen it up a little bit. So just be aware of that when you're doing it. This is what the cakes look like out of the oven. Never are they evenly baked when baked in my hooded barbecue. One side is a grill plate and the other side is solid, and then I have them up on inverted stainless steel colanders so they aren't directly on the heat. It means there's always a little bit of a wave on the top of things like cakes and stuff, but we don't care. Most things it's not an issue. We've adapted, though I am looking to upgrade my barbecue sometime in the near future for a 6-burner with solid plate all the way across, but for the moment we adapt. It does mean that cakes tend to be a little lopsided because they're cooking unevenly because of the heat, especially any sort of a sponge cake or something high in eggs. It tends to bake a little unevenly, but nobody cares. So long as it's cooked and it tastes good, then everyone is happy. After that, I made up some sourdough pasta. Sometimes when I've neglected my starter a bit and I want to make bread, I use whatever is in the jar for pasta or similar so that I can feed the starter into a little bit of a better health. I kind of like it sometimes because it makes a decision for me on what to make for dinner. If I'm making pasta or something, then I may as well use it for dinner and that sort of thing. So sometimes it's always good. But it's also a really good way to use up eggs, and I can freeze excess pasta. So I did a couple of batches. My standard, this is one I should put up on the website from start to finish and a video of some sort. I do about 400 grams of flour, 3 eggs, 60 grams of oil, and 100 grams of starter. I bring it to the small ball stage in the Thermix or in a food processor of some sort. Then I tip it out onto a dough mat and bring it together to be a bit more cohesive. I do find that sourdough pasta will feel a little more dry to begin with than standard pasta dough, but it comes more pliable in its resting time as the starter hydrates the rest of the flour. So you do want it to be a little more dry initially, because otherwise it ends up a little bit too stretchy and hard to roll out. It just springs back too much. 2 batches of that done and put in a Ziploc bag to rest, or a bowl with a lid, something that isn't going to let it dry out. I have set bags, these Ziploc bags tend to be labelled and set for specific tasks, and I reuse them for only those set tasks. So I use the Ziploc bags for that sort of thing and try to make sure that they don't get thrown out, that they are reused as required. Then I fed my starters and put them aside for use later, so they would be all lovely and bubbly and fresh to use for making bread. Because even though I use my starters at all stages, they do of course make the most reliably timable bread. If your starter is at peak when you're making a recipe, you are more aware of how long your dough is going to take to proof and things like that than if you're using it when it's already flat. I rolled out the pasta using my KitchenAid attachment, all the standard, through from on the thickest, then fold it and through again on the thick, and then slowly decreasing until it hits the thinnest setting. I cut it manually with my pastry cutter and hang it on the pasta tray to dry off a bit. I don't let my pasta fully dry. I find that if I let it fully dry and then I freeze it, when I go to cook it, it has a bit of a crumbly texture. It tends to fall apart a little bit, and I don't like that. So I only want it to dry enough that it's touch dry and it's not going to stick to itself when I put it in something. I put the pasta into Ziploc bags. Again, as I said, I have some of these Ziploc bags that are stored in the freezer. So I go and I grab the pasta bags out of the freezer, put the pasta in it, put them back in the freezer, and every time we use the pasta, I put those bags back in the freezer too. So I bag it up in portion sizing. 250 to 300 grams is generally what I portion it to, and then that way we know how many bags we're going to need for a meal for everyone, or how many just for Darryl and I, that sort of thing. And then I put them in the freezer somewhere nice and flat up the top of the freezer where they can be stored. Sourdough pasta is one of those things that we do make room for in the freezer. We don't have huge amounts of freezer space, but it's one of those things that we really enjoy, and it's a good way to use up eggs and things like that. So it's well worth finding the space in the freezer to have a stack of those. And you just want them without anything stacked on top, because once they get broken up, they're going to cook broken up, obviously. We do, of course, have dried pasta that we buy all the time to eat, and the kids actually really like the dried pasta. They don't have a problem with it. Darryl and I mainly I prefer the sourdough pasta and the texture of fresh pasta. So if I can have that, that would be my choice over using dried pasta. Though we have found that the ramen that I've been buying is a much better texture for me than dried pasta. It goes a bit softer, and I think that's different. Sourdough pasta ends up this really soft and silky mouthfeel. I can never get the dried pasta that I buy, which I must say is the cheapest dried pasta I can buy, into that soft and silky texture. It's always a little bit chewy, and it's not great. Whereas the ramen noodles seem to go that really softer texture. So we have been using them a lot for pasta type dishes as well as noodles too. But the sourdough pasta, I always like to have a couple of batches in the freezer to use. For dinner, we did the red pesto pasta, same style as always. There's a short on the site for the pesto pasta that I make. It's a few egg yolks in the bottom of a bowl with some cowboy candy, some sun-dried tomato pesto or basil pesto, whatever pesto you want to use, a drizzle of olive oil and some lemon juice, and then you add the hot pasta to the mix to cook the eggs. So as you're adding the hot pasta to that mix, it cooks the eggs and turns to this lovely, silky, rich sauce. And then I fried up some of the breakfast sausage to serve with the pasta. So this was a red pasta sauce, so I thought this breakfast sausage would work quite well with it, and it did. It was super simple, using what I had, and super tasty. It would be better with some greens in it, some spinach or some sauteed broccoli or something, but at the moment we don't really have any of that available, so we just did it as is. That night I had mixed up some English muffin sourdough so we could have English muffins the next day as well. So the first thing the next morning, I tipped the dough out onto my dough mat. Depending on the season as to how quickly you have to get to these doughs the next day. Sometimes proofing it overnight in summer means that I need to be up at 5 a.m. to deal with that dough, even with a reduced starter quantity, just because it's been so hot overnight. At the moment, it's quite cool, so it doesn't really matter yet. But so the next morning, whenever I got to it, I tipped the dough out on the dough mat and rolled it down to a big rectangle. Now, I'm a bit lazy here. I don't bother with round English muffins because that would mean cutting them out, re-rolling, cutting them out, re-rolling, cutting them out, that sort of thing. And that's a lot of effort. So I just roll it out into a big rectangle, and then I cut it sort of evenly into squares. I then place them all onto a baking tray with some semolina on it to rest for 15-ish minutes or more. Now, size-wise, it's purely up to you. You can do them whatever size you want. I tend to do them in fairly small squares because I find that the kids have this, as most kids do, that it's quantity over quality for most children. So I could give them one really good size one and they'd be looking for more, or they can have two small ones, which is actually equal to that one larger one, and they're happier with that. So we cater to what we need to keep everyone satisfied, and it doesn't worry me making them smaller. Small is good anyway because they use an egg per sort of thing, or a sausage patty per or whatever, so they're actually getting more of the inside to the muffins than just having all that bread. After I've rested the dough, I heat up a cast iron pan that I have a lid for, nice and hot, but not too hot. You don't want it too hot because they will burn, especially with the semolina that's there. So I place the muffins into the dry pan and put the lid on. I find this works best to get those big craggy bubbles because of the steam released as they cooked. You can put the trays in the oven and they will cook through, but they tend to be a lot more dense, I find, which is fine. They're still tasty, but they don't have the big open internals that they do when you're using this steam. So I much prefer the texture of them done in the pan with the extra steam than I do them done in the oven. But you can save time, definitely save time by doing them in the oven. So they do cook unevenly in the pan because it depends on where the muffin bubbles. So you do get some darker spots where the bubbles have more contact with the pan. Sometimes it looks burnt. We've been over this. I've had some comments on photos of them that they look burnt, but I've also had some comments that everything I cook looks burnt. So, you know, each to their own of how you choose to eat them. You definitely can do them with less color if you like, but we like everything to have a fair bit of color on it, and we think it, you know, adds flavor. But they will cook unevenly no matter what, because as they bubble, there'll be certain parts that have more contact to the heat and certain parts that don't. So we flip them. It takes 4 to 6 minutes on each side, depending on the temperature of your pan and the size of the muffins. You can generally tell. The first side, you'll see you cook it and the top will bubble up, and it'll have a bit of a skin on it, and then you flip them over and then you can tell by the color when they're done. So they take about 4 to 6 minutes each side. They, as I said, they do have some color on them. Depends, personal preference, how much color, but when you open them, they're so craggy and fluffy and they have such great flavor that we just prefer to do them this way. I then pressed some of the breakfast sausage mince into patty shapes and fried them off in a pan as well. I like them to be the size that suits the muffins. So if you're making big muffins, you might want big flat sausage patties. If you're making small muffins like I am, these are probably only 50-gram patties and just sort of left fairly small because we're going to be putting them on these smaller muffins. So you make the patties however big you want, sort it out. I definitely need to find myself one of those cast iron burger presses so that I can put it in the pan and press them there. It's definitely something that's on my list of things to get, because using my hand was, you know, inefficient and it's hot. But yeah, size of however you want them. You can cook them as well as you want it to. Pork is okay to eat rare. It's a red meat, so you can eat it rare if you want to. We like it well cooked on this sort of a thing, and I like to get the caramelization color on the outsides of the patties as well. You know, like I said, we like things with color. Some people call it burnt. We like it flavored. So I fried them off in the pan in batches for everyone to have them. I fried off excess because they're nice cold too. So, you know, they're a good snack later. We served them up for what equates to Darryl and my breakfast and the kids' lunch, because that's how we roll. We put caramelised onion jam on them, some fresh duck egg mayo. I had a bit of cheese on mine, and then we had the sausage patties with fried eggs on them, and just served them up like that. So like a McDonald's gourmet breakfast patty thing. I don't even know what they're called. McMuffins? Are they McMuffins? Something like that. So that's what we had for brunch that day. A favoured dish, but again one that takes a bit of a time, is a bit like making bagels. They take so much time in the morning to actually get them made, and hey, they're worth it, but I have to have the time in the morning, and I do tend to do most of my typing and admin work first thing in the morning because I get up about 7, but not everyone else gets up that early, so I tend to get that sort of stuff done in the morning. So sometimes baking things off like bagels and English muffins or overnight sourdough pancakes, things like that, tend to just, I sit there and go, I just don't know if I'm going to have time in the morning, so I'm not going to do it. Loaves of bread are easier in that particular instance, or just flat bread, because then it doesn't matter how long it sits in the fridge. So that was the next couple of days of the August food prep from the groceries that were done in end of July. we're sort of crossing over time a little bit here. I've kept everything consecutive, but at the same time we're talking a couple of weeks back, which isn't what I normally do. I normally like to keep the videos a little bit more current, but that is the way it is right this minute, and I'm going to have to just deal with that because it's a busy season, and coming into spring it might become more of the done thing because there'll be other things to add in amongst all the food prep. And filming the food prep's fine. I just do that. The camera sits on a tripod in my kitchen and I do it. But it's putting it all together and having time to do these voiceovers that becomes the challenge. Though as we get further into spring and summer, it will be lighter later. Like I think it's 5 o'clock at the moment and it's still light. But I know that because I'm out here, I think no one has gone to feed the animals yet because they didn't want to make lots of noise. So there's a trade-off there. So thank you for joining me again today, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.